Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's Last Post ceremony. My name is Sharon Bown, and joining us today from the Australian Army is Lieutenant Colonel Paul Murphy. Today, we are pleased to acknowledge the presence of Minister Mick Gentleman, Australian Capital Territory Minister for Police and Emergency Services. We also acknowledge the presence of Major General Wesley of Fort Benningham, Georgia. We acknowledge the senior officers from the ACT Emergency Services Agency, members of the ACT Rural Fire Service, ACT State Emergency Service, ACT Fire and Rescue and ACT Ambulance Service, along with the Emergency Services Agency support staff and representatives of the ACT Parks and Territory Services. We also welcome senior officers from the Justice and Community Safety Directorate and members of the ACT Bushfire Council. The ACT Emergency Services Agencies comprises over 1,500 full-time and volunteer personnel. Their duties include providing emergency management services to the ACT and surrounding South East New South Wales region. We sincerely thank them for their efforts in ensuring the safety of our community. We would also like to acknowledge representatives of other fire and emergency services from across Australia and New Zealand who are here today. In particular, we also warmly welcome the family and friends of Private Albert Jones, whose story will be told shortly. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL and Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria and RSL Queensland, who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection by family, visitors and students on behalf of the following schools: Oakville Drive Public School, Castle Hill, from New South Wales. Please stand and join in singing the National Anthem. Boys and girls, please be seated. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight we will read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and operations for more than a century. But first we present a lament, flowers of the forest. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the pool of reflection.
Today we remember and pay tribute to Private Albert Jones. Albert Jones was born on the 13th of November 1874 at Tuina in the Southern Tablelands, west of Sydney and the Blue Mountains. He was the fifth son of New South Wales policeman Montgomery Jones and his wife Mary. Albert attended state school and after reaching maturity moved north to take up farming in the Clarence Valley. Here at Cootes Crossing he made his home, but he remained a single man. With the outbreak of war in August 1914, Albert was almost 40 years old and did not join immediately. Many thought at the time that the war would probably be over quickly, After the Anzacs landed at Gallipoli in April 1915, stalemate set in and casualties soared. Many who had held back from enlisting now changed their minds and decided to lend a hand. Among them was Albert Jones, who joined up on the 18th of July. There he met and befriended Charlie Cook, who at 44 was even older than Albert. Perhaps the pair were initially drawn to each other by their grey hair, standing out among the predominantly younger men. Both Albert and Charlie were assigned to the 9th Reinforcements for the 13th Infantry Battalion as privates. Aside from taking part in the National Rifle Reserve, Albert had no prior military service, but there was some military blood in his veins. His grandfather, Jeremiah Jones, had served with the Royal Navy in the Napoleonic Wars and had emigrated to Australia around 1840 to try his hand at farming around Bungendore, not far from where we stand. After initial training, the new troops were ready to go. On the 30th of September 1915, they sailed out of Sydney Heads aboard the Argyllshire. Crossing the Indian Ocean, Jones and his comrades arrived in Egypt a few weeks later and settled into camp life in the hot and dusty conditions. Early in the new year, the reinforcements joined the veterans of the 13th Battalion, who, along with the entire Allied force, had withdrawn from Gallipoli just a few weeks prior. No doubt, much time would have been spent listening to stories of their experiences on the peninsula. But their time at the 13th would be short. With Australian reinforcements pouring into Egypt, plans were afoot to expand the forces and create 2 new divisions. This meant Albert and Charlie would now go into a new battalion, the 45th Infantry. There they joined C Company under Captain Howden. After a few months in Egypt, the Australians learned they were going to France to fight the Germans on the Western Front. Jones and the 45th Battalion boarded the Kinflins Castle at Alexandria on the 2nd of June 1916. A few days later, they disembarked at Marseille. The train journey took them up the picturesque Rhone Valley, while on the way the Australians were feted with cigarettes, fruit and flowers by French civilians. Arrival in northern France was followed by weeks of training and experience in the front line near Forbay. Albert and Charlie had another thing in common. Both were crack shots and became snipers. Just days before the disastrous attack at Fromelles, the 45th Battalion and other units of the 4th Division were pulled out and sent south. Here on the Somme, a different fate awaited them, at a place called Pozières. At the beginning of July 1916, a great British and French attack on the Somme had begun. After slow progress and heavy casualties, more troops were called in. Men of the 1st and 2nd Australian Divisions were sent in to capture and hold a line around the ruined village of Pozières. Suffering very heavy casualties, they soon needed to be relieved and the 4th Division was brought in. At the end of the month, Albert Jones and the 45th Battalion began the long march up to the front. Arriving on the 4th of August, the men soon knew that this place was a level higher in intensity. The battalion adjutant, Captain Joseph Lee, described their first night. The sky that night was lit by the flashes of the guns, and the bursting shells glowed like a red sunset in midsummer. All night long the guns roared, and the watching troops wondered what it was like in an inferno like that. They would soon find out. Next day the men struggled through crowds of Australians in the trenches of Sausage Valley, in places choked with wounded. At the front line, they relieved the men of the 2nd Division, who had attacked the night before. After 12 days in the front, this division was worn out after suffering almost 7,000 casualties. The night of the 5th to the 6th of August was the battalion's first in the forward lines. After weeks of bombardment, the trenches were almost obliterated, and men found themselves in a virtual moonscape of horror, death and destruction. It is perhaps well that Albert Jones didn't endure it for long. Around midnight, a fragment from one of the hundreds of shells screaming in found its mark and killed him outright. All that could be done was a hasty burial in a shell hole outside the trench. With so much destruction around Pozieres, many bodies were never recovered. And that was sadly the case with Albert. We know precious little about Albert's character, but his mate Charlie Cook remembered him as a man most careful, who neither drank nor smoked and only allowed himself sixpence per day. Perhaps that, combined with volunteering to serve his country, actually tells us a lot. His name is also listed on the Roll of Honour on my right, among more than 60,000 Australians who died while serving in the First World War. This is but one of the many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Private Albert Jones, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the reading of the Ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them.
Lest we forget.
Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozieres or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. but in Australia they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the last post ceremony. Thank you for attending the Australian War Memorial, and we wish you all a very good evening. Thank you.